They say every life has a moment where something invisible cracks open inside you, quietly, almost secretly, like a door you never noticed before, suddenly unlocking itself. Most people walk past that moment. They feel it, they sense it, but they ignore it because it doesn't announce itself with thunder. It arrives with a whisper. And right now, as you hear these words, that same whisper is asking you a question you've avoided your whole life. Are you truly awake? Or are you only dreaming that you are? Because the truth is harsh. Most people never wake up. They move through their days like sleepwalkers, repeating the same patterns, the same fears, the same borrowed beliefs. They defend their prison because it's familiar. They protect the illusion because it's comfortable. They cling to identities built from other people's expectations, never realizing that the life they're living is not their own. The world teaches you how to survive, but it never teaches you how to see. And if you cannot see, you cannot change. You cannot evolve. You cannot transform. But something inside you resisted. Something refused to die quietly. That's why you're here. That's why these words found you. Because you already know, deep down, you are standing at the edge of something vast, something ancient, something infinitely more real than the life you've been told to accept. The universe has been trying to wake you, gently at first, and now with a force that feels impossible to ignore. Moments of restlessness, sudden waves of clarity, a feeling that the world you see is only a thin veil stretched over a deeper intelligence pulsing beneath everything. You've sensed it. You've tasted it. Something is shifting. And if you allow yourself to hear these words, not just with your ears, but with your entire being, something will shift permanently. Because every human life reaches a threshold where the old self begins to decay, and the new self is still too young to speak. That in-between place is terrifying. It feels like losing your identity, your direction, your certainty. But that is the birthplace of transformation. That is where real awakening begins. You see, most people mistake stability for safety. They cling to routines, to familiar failures, to predictable suffering, thinking that repetition means security. But repetition is only a slow form of dying. You weren't designed to stay the same. Consciousness evolves through friction, through disruption, through the collapse of everything false. When the life you once knew starts falling apart, it's not punishment, it's preparation. Something within you is rearranging itself. You're being dismantled so you can be rebuilt.
McKenna once said that nature rewards courage and punishes hesitation. And he was right.
The universe doesn't respond to the person you pretend to be. It responds to the person buried beneath all the pretending. You didn't come into this world to perform. You came here to remember your power, to remember your purpose. To remember that you are a participant in the unfolding of something immeasurably larger than personal success or failure. You are a fragment of the universe awakening to itself. Think about it. The thoughts you carry, the doubts that sabotage you, the fears that hold you hostage, where do they come from? Were you born with them? Or were they slowly injected into your mind by a culture obsessed with conformity? A culture that fears individuals who think for themselves. A culture that rewards obedience and punishes originality. Your mind has been shaped by forces you never agreed to. You have inherited the anxieties of generations. You are living inside a psychological architecture built by people who never understood consciousness to begin with. And this is why awakening is so rare. Because to wake up, you must break the pattern. You must interrupt the momentum of everything that has kept you small. You must walk willingly into uncertainty, even when your old self is screaming for you to stay where you are. Transformation demands sacrifice, not of your joy, but of your illusion. Not of your potential, but of your limitations. There comes a moment when you must choose, remain loyal to the version of yourself that is slowly dying, or become loyal to the version of yourself that is fighting to be born. And that choice is the axis upon which your entire destiny will turn. You can feel that choice pressing on you, not tomorrow, not someday, now, right now. You can feel the friction between the self you've outgrown and the self you haven't yet embodied. You can feel the inner war between your desire for expansion and your addiction to comfort. Every part of you that wants to rise is battling every part of you that fears what rising will cost. But let me tell you this, the cost of staying asleep is far greater, because the longer you deny your calling, the heavier your life becomes. The longer you betray your inner voice, the louder your suffering grows. The longer you postpone the life you know you were meant to live, the more hollow the present feels. And eventually, the universe stops whispering and starts tearing away everything that chains you to the version of yourself you were never meant to remain. You were not born to be a character in someone else's story. You were meant to be the author of your own. You were not born to be a spectator of your existence. You were meant to be a creator, a force of will, a source of meaning, a conscious embodiment of evolution itself. Somewhere deep inside, you know this. You feel it as a pressure in your chest, a restlessness in your soul, a hunger that nothing physical has ever been able to satisfy. That hunger is the sign. That hunger is the proof. Something greater is calling you, and that calling is not coming from outside. It is coming from within. It is the part of you that never agreed to be small. The part of you that refuses to disappear quietly, the part of you that knows you were meant to experience life not as a repetition of yesterday, but as an unfolding miracle of possibility. But here's the paradox. Before you can rise, something within you must end, not your life, your identity. The identity shaped by fear, the identity shaped by survival, the identity shaped by patterns that were never yours to begin with. Awakening is not about becoming something new. It is about remembering what you were before the world taught you how to forget. And right now, your old self feels threatened. It feels like everything stable is dissolving. You feel the ground shifting beneath your feet. You feel the cracking of who you once were. But this is not destruction. This is initiation. This is the moment every mystic, every seeker, every awakened soul speaks about. The moment where illusion falls apart so truth can finally enter. Nothing is collapsing. You are just outgrowing the walls of a life that can no longer contain who you are becoming. And as the realization drifts deeper, something subtle begins to rearrange itself within the mind, as if a hidden mechanism, one you never knew existed, quietly unlocks. You feel the boundary between who you think you are and what you are becoming begin to blur. It's not a dramatic shift, not a lightning strike or a cosmic explosion, but a slow, deliberate unraveling, the kind that makes you reconsider every assumption you've built your life on. You begin noticing how effortlessly people surrender their inner authority, how they let the expectations of others script their beliefs, their reactions, their decisions. You see clearly that most of what you inherited mentally was never yours to begin with. And the shock of that realization carries a strange type of freedom, as if the bars of an invisible cage suddenly become visible for the first time. Something inside you begins to uncoil like an ancient instinct waking from a centuries-long sleep. You start feeling everything with uncomfortable clarity. The pressure of societal rhythms, the hypnotic pull of conformity, the invisible tug of collective fears. You feel the machinery of the world grinding all around you. And yet, for the first time, you're no longer a part of its gears. You're simply watching, aware of the precise moment when your inner compass shifts away from survival and turns toward meaning. It's a quiet rebellion, but it's the kind that changes the architecture of a life. You start seeing how every system has attempted to domesticate your imagination, to sand down the edges of your curiosity, to make you predictable, manageable, easy to categorize. But the mind, once awakened, refuses to return to its previous frame. Something starts observing from a distance, a witness you didn't know you possessed. This witness begins documenting everything, the patterns you repeat, the illusions you chase, the fears you indulge. You begin realizing that growth isn't an upward journey, but a dissolving, a shedding, a surrender to your own rawness. You are not becoming more, you are becoming less. Less conditioned, less reactive, less bound by the narratives that never belong to you. And strangely, in that becoming less, you begin to feel more alive than ever before, as if the original version of you, the one untouched by noise, finally gets permission to breathe. The old identity doesn't die quietly. It clings, it resists, it bargains. It reminds you of the comfort of the known, the safety of repetition, the familiar rhythm of old emotional habits. It tells you that transformation is dangerous, that stability is more important than truth. But somewhere in the depths of your awareness, you know you can't return. You know that once you've glimpsed the inner landscape without distortion, going back to the old version of yourself would be like pretending you've never seen the ocean after standing on its shore. Something irreversible has already begun. You feel the internal scaffolding rearranging itself, not with force, but with the slow certainty of tectonic shifts beneath the earth. Suddenly, you recognize how much of your suffering was never personal but inherited, absorbed from family, culture, and collective memory. You begin tracing the emotional echoes that have lived in your body for years, echoes that never belonged to your own story. You see how fear has been passed from generation to generation like an heirloom, and how most people carry it unconsciously, treating it as identity rather than influence. And in that understanding, something inside you grows compassionate, not only toward others, but toward the parts of yourself you once tried to escape. You realize they were never your enemy. They were simply forgotten fragments waiting to be understood. As this awareness deepens, the world around you begins to feel almost transparent, as though beneath every action lies a hidden intention, beneath every belief, a deeper yearning. You start noticing how most people are driven not by desire, but by avoidance, avoiding uncertainty, avoiding disapproval, avoiding themselves. You watch them cling to routines, not because they love them, but because they fear what the absence of those routines would reveal. And suddenly, you feel an indescribable empathy for the human condition, not in a sentimental way, but in a raw, existential way. Every person you see becomes a mirror reflecting the quiet ache of consciousness trying to navigate a world that never taught it how to exist. The shift inside continues, subtle but unstoppable. You begin moving differently through your own inner life. Instead of reacting, you pause. Instead of collapsing into old narratives, you observe them. Instead of fleeing discomfort, you follow it inward, tracing it like smoke back to its source. You start realizing that what you once called weakness was actually sensitivity misunderstood. What you once called confusion was actually the beginning of insight. What you once called fear was simply the boundary of an old identity dissolving. Your thoughts begin forming with a different rhythm, slower, heavier, more deliberate. You no longer chase meaning, you sit quietly and let it emerge. You no longer seek validation, you observe the part of you that ever needed it. You no longer measure your value against the world, you feel it rising from within, independent of all external recognition. There is a solidness growing inside you, not the rigid solidness of ego, but the grounded solidness of self-awareness. As you continue drifting deeper into this unfolding, you notice another shift. Time begins to feel different, not in hours or minutes, but in depth. Some moments feel heavy with significance, stretching out like entire lifetimes, while others dissolve instantly. You start seeing time not as a linear progression, but as a psychological phenomenon shaped by presence. The more aware you become, the slower it seems to move. The more conscious you are, the more details appear, the more layers reveal themselves. And with each layer you see the mind for what it truly is, not a container of thoughts, but a universe of possibilities, each thought a doorway into a deeper dimension. You start recognizing the architecture of your own perception, the way beliefs act like filters, the way memory shapes identity, the way imagination opens or closes the boundaries of what you believe is possible. You begin understanding that reality is not something you enter, but something you participate in shaping. Every thought becomes a brushstroke. Every choice a shift in the composition. There is no sudden epiphany, no dramatic breakthrough, just the ongoing, quiet expansion of awareness. You begin trusting your inner voice more, not because it shouts, but because it whispers from a place untouched by fear. And as that trust strengthens, something remarkable happens. You no longer feel the need to prove anything. You no longer feel compelled to perform your identity for the world. You no longer feel trapped inside who you used to be. Instead, you feel spacious, fluid, adaptable, as though the boundaries around your sense of self have softened. You begin walking through your days with a silent reverence, noticing the intelligence in every experience. Even difficult moments feel different, not as punishments, but as invitations. You start experiencing life not as a sequence of obstacles, but as a series of mirrors reflecting the exact lesson you're ready to understand. And slowly, you begin feeling gratitude not just for the pleasant moments, but for the uncomfortable ones too, because they reveal the parts of yourself that were waiting to evolve. The transformation doesn't announce itself, it simply becomes the new ground beneath your feet. You realize that the person you were clinging to has already dissolved, and in its place stands someone more honest, more awake, more aligned with truth than comfort. And as this new identity continues to unfold, you sense that the journey is far from over. It's only deepening, pulling you into a version of yourself you were always meant to meet. And as this new identity settles quietly into the core of your being, you begin sensing an inner alignment that feels almost otherworldly. It's not confidence, not certainty, not pride. Those are too small, too fragile, too dependent on external recognition. Feeling is different. It's a grounded clarity, a steady pulse of knowing that doesn't need to be justified. You move through your days with an awareness that no longer rushes to interpret everything, no longer tries to control every outcome. Instead, you observe the unfolding with a kind of sacred detachment, as if watching the threads of your life weave themselves into patterns you were once too distracted to notice. You start noticing how effortlessly life responds when you stop forcing it, how doors open not because you push them, but because you no longer cling to the ones that were never meant for you. You realize that struggle often comes from resisting the natural flow of your own transformation. When you stop resisting, even chaos begins to feel meaningful. Even uncertainty carries a strange sense of direction. You begin to trust the intelligence operating beneath the surface of your experiences, an intelligence that seems to whisper, "Keep going, there is more for you here." Slowly you sense a new kind of strength emerging, quiet, stable, unshakable, not the strength of dominance or ambition, but the strength of someone who has met their own depths and did not turn away. You become less reactive to the world because the world no longer dictates who you are. The noise outside can rise and fall, but inside there is a steady rhythm that remains untouched. And in that stillness you feel a growing responsibility, not to impress others, not to prove anything, but to honor the truth that has been awakening within you. You begin seeing how much energy you once wasted trying to maintain old versions of yourself, trying to fit into shapes that never reflected your nature. You see how often you performed your identity instead of living it. You feel a quiet grief for the years spent hiding your depth to make others comfortable, for all the times you silenced your intuition because it didn't match the expectations placed upon you. But even that grief becomes part of the transformation. It softens you. It reminds you that every version of you was trying its best with the understanding it had at the time. And yet, beneath that softness grows a new kind of fire, a fire born from clarity, not anger. You no longer feel the need to dim your perception or dilute your truth. You speak differently, not louder, but with more precision. You act differently, not faster, but with more intention. You begin trusting the subtle signals that rise from within, the small impulses that once felt insignificant but now feel like the fingerprints of your deeper nature guiding you forward. As your awareness expands, the world begins to reveal itself in layers. You see the emotional currents behind people's words, the unspoken fears behind their distractions, the unresolved stories disguised as confidence. You begin recognizing how much of human behavior is shaped by wounds that were never acknowledged, how many decisions are driven by insecurities pretending to be certainty. And instead of judging, you simply understand. You see the fragility in everyone, even in those who seem the strongest. You see the longing hidden behind ambition, the exhaustion behind constant performance, the loneliness behind noise. This understanding changes the way you engage with others. You stop taking their reactions personally because you recognize they are responding to their own internal storms, not to you. Their anger, their distance, their confusion, none of it defines your worth anymore. You respond with presence rather than defensiveness. You listen without absorbing. You hold space without losing yourself. You begin feeling the immense freedom that comes from no longer needing to be understood, approved of, or accepted by everyone. This inner shift also changes the way you experience solitude. What once felt like emptiness now feels like nourishment. You begin to crave silence, not as an escape, but as a return to the place within you that the world cannot touch. In that silence, you feel your mind clearing, your emotions settling, your intuition sharpening. You discover that solitude is not loneliness. It is intimacy with your own consciousness. And the more time you spend in that realm, the more attuned you become to the subtle movements of your inner world. Gradually, you start noticing the emergence of a new kind of vision, not with your eyes, but with your awareness. You begin sensing possibilities before they appear. You feel the direction of your path without needing external confirmation. You recognize the difference between impulses born from fear and those born from truth. This clarity becomes your compass, guiding you toward choices that resonate with your deepest values rather than your temporary emotions. The decisions you once agonized over now feel simpler, not because they are easy, but because you are no longer choosing from a place of confusion. Deepening continues as you examine the architecture of your desires. You realize that many of the things you once wanted were merely reflections of what you believed you should want. The goals, the achievements, the expectations, they were designed to fit a version of you that no longer exists. As that realization settles, something remarkable happens. Your desires start reorganizing themselves. What remains are the desires that align with your essence, the ones that feel like extensions of your true self rather than borrowed ambitions. And slowly, you begin moving in alignment with those desires. You stop hesitating. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain familiarity. You stop apologizing for the magnitude of your inner expansion. You feel a surge of creative energy that had been dormant for years, a raw force that begins shaping the choices you make and the paths you pursue. You realize that creativity is not limited to art or expression. It is the act of consciously shaping your reality moment by moment. In this new rhythm, even challenges feel different. Instead of resisting them, you meet them with curiosity. You see them as opportunities to test the strength of your new awareness, to refine your understanding, to expand your capacity. You no longer perceive difficulty as punishment, but as collaboration. The universe sculpting you into someone capable of carrying deeper levels of consciousness. And as this unfolding continues, something inside you stabilizes. You begin sensing a quiet authority rising within, a knowing that does not need validation. This authority is not aggressive or controlling. It is simply present, unshaken by chaos, unthreatened by uncertainty. You begin living from this place, responding to life rather than reacting to it. This subtle shift changes everything. Conversations feel different. Relationships feel different. Even your own thoughts feel different, as though they originate from a deeper source within you. The world may still swirl with noise, but you move through it with a clarity that cannot be shaken. And in that clarity, a new chapter of selfhood begins. Not forced, not fabricated, but arising naturally from the depth you have allowed yourself to explore. And as this clarity deepens, you begin noticing how life moves toward you differently. People approach you with a tone they never used before, as if sensing a subtle shift in your presence. Situations unfold with a natural coherence that feels orchestrated by an intelligence far older than the mind. Even the challenges that arise come with an underlying message, a quiet invitation to step into a greater capacity. You feel an expanding sense of responsibility, not the heavy obligation of the past, but a sacred responsibility to live as the person you've worked so hard to become. You can no longer betray your own awareness. You can no longer shrink to fit someone else's comfort. You can no longer abandon the depth you've uncovered just to keep life predictable. And in that realization, something within you finally settles into its rightful place. You observe the world with an attentiveness that feels almost supernatural. The subtleties that once slipped past you now reveal themselves effortlessly. The micro-expressions, the emotional currents, the hidden truths behind people's reactions. You see how often people lie not out of malice, but out of fear. How they present versions of themselves shaped by the wounds they never resolved. You understand the silent desperation behind their constant performance, the fragile hope behind their ambitions, the longing for connection beneath their distractions. And rather than feeling superior, you feel deeply connected to the shared human struggle. It becomes clear that every soul is navigating its own labyrinth, searching for a light they've forgotten they carry. You begin interacting with the world from a place of quiet authenticity. Your words become deliberate, precise, free from the need to impress or manipulate. You no longer speak to be heard. You speak to be understood, even if only by yourself. You find yourself listening more deeply, not waiting to respond, but absorbing the essence of what is being shared. The conversations that once felt shallow now reveal layers you never noticed. The connections that once seemed ordinary begin to feel profound. You realize that presence itself is a transformative force, reshaping the quality of every interaction. As this transformation unfolds, you start recognizing an inner architecture forming within you. An emotional intelligence not taught in schools, a psychological strength not earned through achievements. This structure becomes the framework through which you navigate your experiences. When challenges arise, you don't collapse into old patterns. You observe, you process, you adjust. You respond from awareness rather than instinct. And each time you choose awareness, the structure strengthens, becoming a stable foundation for the next chapter of your evolution. You begin feeling the boundaries of your old identity dissolving further. The impulses that once dominated your behavior lose their power. The reactivity that once controlled your decisions begins to fade. You feel lighter, not because life has become easy, but because you're no longer carrying the weight of past versions of yourself. You are living from a place that exists beyond your history, beyond your conditioning, beyond the expectations projected onto you. This new internal state shifts your relationship with time. You no longer feel rushed by the artificial urgency that governs most lives. You move with purpose, but without panic. You act with intention, but without desperation. You begin understanding that patience is not waiting. It is trusting your timing, trusting your intuition, trusting the unfolding of your life even when the path isn't fully visible. And in that trust, you discover a sense of freedom you never imagined possible. You begin noticing that life becomes a conversation rather than a chase. You express yourself and life responds. You decide and life rearranges. You release something and life offers something new. There is a reciprocity in every moment, a rhythm in every experience. You start participating in your life rather than resisting it, shaping it rather than surviving it. And slowly, the life you once hoped for begins emerging, not as fantasy, but as the natural consequence of living in alignment with your inner truth. The further you travel into this awareness, the more you begin sensing an inner fire awakening, a creative force that was buried beneath fear, doubt, and conformity for years. It begins expressing itself not only in your actions, but in your energy, in the way you inhabit your own existence. You feel ideas rising with clarity, possibilities emerging with confidence, opportunities aligning with your inner expansion. You begin realizing that creativity isn't something you produce. It's something you allow. It flows through you when you stop suppressing your own truth. This creative fire reshapes your ambitions. What you once pursued for recognition or security no longer interests you. What you once avoided now calls to you with startling clarity. You begin orienting yourself not toward what is safe, but toward what is meaningful. And meaning becomes the compass by which you navigate every decision. You start choosing paths not because they are comfortable, but because they are aligned with the person you are becoming. You begin walking away from what drains your spirit and moving toward what awakens it. As this inner evolution continues, you begin to see the immense courage required to truly transform. Not the courage to fight the world, but the courage to face yourself. The courage to let go of identities that no longer serve you. The courage to stand in the unfamiliar territory of growth without clinging to the comfort of the past. The courage to trust your inner voice even when the world doesn't understand. You recognize that this courage has been guiding you all along, quietly pushing you beyond your limitations, urging you into deeper territories of your own consciousness. You begin understanding that true transformation doesn't happen in sudden, dramatic moments. It happens in the consistent, quiet choices you make every day. The choice to observe rather than react. The choice to reflect rather than escape. The choice to grow rather than remain numb. The choice to listen to the subtle signals of your own intuition, even when they contradict what others expect of you. These choices build your future in ways that no external achievement ever could. As you embody this awareness, you feel a shift in your internal compass. You start sensing a direction that feels both deeply familiar and strangely new. It isn't a path laid out by society or shaped by external validation. It's a path that seems to rise from within your own consciousness, formed by your unique essence, shaped by your inner truth. And for the first time, you feel fully capable of walking it. Not because it is easy, but because it is yours. In this new state of mind, your relationship with fear transforms. Fear no longer acts as a boundary. It becomes a signal, a guide pointing toward areas within you that are ready to evolve. You stop avoiding the places that scare you and begin walking into them with awareness. You realize that fear is not the enemy, it is the doorway. It is the threshold between who you have been and who you are capable of becoming. And each time you step through that threshold, you expand the limits of your own potential. The deeper you go, the more you realize that the journey is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. The clarity you feel is not something you learned. It is something you uncovered. The strength within you is not something you developed. It is something you rediscovered. Wisdom guiding you is not something you borrowed. It is something you've carried your entire life, waiting for the moment when you were finally ready to listen. And now, standing in the presence of this expanded awareness, you begin to feel the weight of your transformation, not as burden, but as power, the power to choose differently, the power to break old cycles, the power to create meaning rather than search endlessly for it, the power to step into a version of yourself that once felt unreachable. You feel the quiet authority of someone who is no longer running from themselves, the steady presence of someone who has confronted their shadows and emerged with clarity rather than fear. And as this realization crystallizes within you, something profound begins to unfold. You recognize that your journey has not only transformed you, it has positioned you to transform others. Not through force, not through preaching, but through presence, through the way you move, the way you listen, the way you exist. People begin feeling safer around you, more open, more understood. They sense the depth you carry and instinctively move closer, drawn by the authenticity that radiates from someone who has journeyed through the interior landscapes of their own consciousness. The world around you continues moving, chaotic and unpredictable, but you no longer feel threatened by its uncertainty. You feel anchored in a truth that cannot be shaken. You understand that the external world may shift endlessly, but your inner world has become the solid ground upon which you stand, a ground carved by awareness, strengthened by presence, illuminated by the clarity of someone who has witnessed themselves fully and from this place. This inner stillness, this expanded presence, this awakened self, you finally understand the purpose of your entire journey. It was never about perfection. It was never about becoming untouchable. It was never about escaping your humanity. It was about reclaiming it. It was about peeling away the layers of conditioning and fear until you return to the core of your existence, raw, aware, awake. And in that awakening comes the final realization, the one that completes the arc of your transformation. You were never meant to follow the world. You were meant to illuminate it. Your journey was never preparing you to become someone else. It was preparing you to finally be yourself, fully, fearlessly, unapologetically, unmistakably. And as you step forward into the next chapter of your life, you carry with you not only the wisdom of your own transformation, but the undeniable truth that everything you need, clarity, strength, direction, purpose, has always been within you, waiting for you to remember. The journey did not change you. It revealed you. And now, at last, you are ready to live as the person you were always meant to become.